Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kit and Clouder, and in this video tutorial we're going to be going through colorless blended techniques. Now in your booklet you should have a bit of a write-up about the colorless blender and going through what it's used for. So when people are starting out there's a little bit of confusion around this marker, and it's this one here with the clear caps on the end. So basically what this is, it's actually a clear marker. So if I get this, I can kind of scribble on the page. You can see nothing's really coming out. It's just the alcohol solution of the marker without any pigment dye in it. But it isn't used to blend. If we were to use all of this to blend, it would actually strip away a lot of the color, whereas the markers themselves will blend seamlessly together without using this. It can, however, be used for a lot of different effects, and also for things like helping with going outside of the lines and correcting mistakes. You should have your little printout here all ready to go. I'm going to take you through how we would use this to fix any mistakes, how we can create fuzzy textures on animals, to draw our own patterns using a resist technique, and also how we can use it to create an almost watercolor type effect. Before we get started on the techniques, I'm just going to take you through colouring up the foxes here. And we're just going to do a very basic blending method using all the techniques that we've previously learned. Now I am going to be using this technique with my Copic markers, but you may be using your Spectrum Noir's Promarkers or a different brand entirely. Now all the colours are listed in your printable booklet and in the alternative brands as well. And I'll just show you what I like to do. This is just a little table that I've made. It's very, very simple. It's got their Copic, Spectrum Noir, Copic, Spectrum Noir. And all I do is I grab that tutorial color list that you have in your booklet, and I write down all of my Copic numbers. So this is if I was using Spectrum Noir, obviously. So I've got E15, E99, E97, etc, etc. So I would write those in, and then I would write the Spectrum Noir equivalent. So for example, my TN4 would go here. So that way you've just got a really quick reference which Copic is which Spectrum Noir. So when I say in the video we're now using E15, you can very quickly see it's this color and the spectrums. Now you can use that with any brand. You don't have to do this, but I just find it helps if you're someone that needs a really good visual clue as to which one's which. In your booklet though, and in all of our classes, we always write our colors in order from light to dark in a color list. So you can easily swap out the lightest color and obviously the first color then, for the first color in the other brands as well. So that's just a little tip of what I like to do for that, just in case it helps you. Okay, so we've got our little foxes here. I'm just going to go and show you how I'm going to colour them up today, and then you can go ahead and do that. We're going to use just a very simple feathered blending method that we used in the previous video tutorials. I'm using a series of E90 markers today to create a really nice orangey base tone. But for our darkest colour, I'm going to use a darker brown, and that's my E15. Okay, so just a really simple blend, remembering our light source that we talked about earlier. And I'm just going to add this to all of my shadow areas. Obviously, we don't have a lot of detail like the face or anything like that here. So we're just making do of adding a bit of shading just to a standard outline. You can just follow along with how I'm doing in the video now, popping in my shadow areas. And it's just really simple. It's just because I want a little bit of contrast between the color blends to show that he's not flat, just to show you what the colorless blended techniques are going to work like when we add these on top. So you can see I'm just doing all my strokes in here, just with that feathered blend that we learnt earlier. Nice and quick. It's not really about getting beautiful shading at this point. We're just laying down some colour on the page so we can start playing. And work your way down through the markers just to blend. So now I've got my E99. I'm going to come straight on top of my previous colour and then extend a little further out here toward the highlight areas. overlapping my strokes and getting that nice and smooth. E97 is next, same thing. Now this color is a lot lighter, so you may need to do a few more strokes, blending out the line of where that previous color has ended before you move on. E95. You can see we don't have much space left now, bringing it down to our lightest color, which is E93. And the whole blend should be fairly smooth. You've applied multiple strokes. If you still see a line between the colors, this just means that you need to add a few more layers of color to get everything nice and smooth there. But don't worry, because we are popping back with texture after, and that's going to give us a whole new dimension on top. Okay, now while that's drying, you can go ahead and color up the other foxes using the same technique. And I'm just going to speed up this part of the video. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see. I'm just going to speed this up, but we're literally just going to do the rest in the exact same way. You can use the rewind button if you want to follow along in a slower detail again. Okay, so our foxes are all colored up here, and I'm going to run through how we're now going to add a few different texture effects. Now I mentioned before that my Colorless blender would help with fixing mistakes, so I'm just going to grab here my marker and I've just gone outside the edge a little bit there. I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. Popping it in to this fox here on the right. So you can see I've gone outside of the edge there with my marker. Now I'm using my Colorless blender pen, and what I'm going to do is just start from this outside edge and then just push the ink in toward the middle. Now I'm not coming up to this line, I'm only coming a short way in, because when we layer up we don't want to blend too far into the actual image, otherwise it'll be noticeable. So just slowly work on getting that blending in, push the ink back in toward the middle, and you'll see it's slowly starting to disappear. Now this won't work with all colors. With very highly pigmented colors like a bright red, it's going to be a little bit harder to remove completely. So just do what you can, but it's a way to help with mistakes. And you can see that's basically now all gone. And as the alcohol dries on the page, it should dry nice and lightly. So you can see just from showing that little experiment, what this marker does is it actually pushes ink. You can use it to push or remove ink on your page. So what we can actually do is use the marker to create a resist effect. So I can actually come in here and draw a circle, and I'm just filling it in, layering my pen down, going over and over, and you'll notice what will happen is as I do this and layer it up, the ink will start to disappear and I'm going to be left with a big white dot. So I've created a resist pattern in the fox, and I can repeat this all over and start to create a polka dot effect. Now if you want a really small one, you just work on the tip, layer that up, and you can do all different sizes. So you can imagine I'm doing dots now, but you can do so many different patterns and ideas. This is just really simple. And obviously as well, I'm just doing it on a fox because it's just a nice generic object that you can use. But you can do things like bricks and patterns, even stars on a night sky. So you might have a really dark color as your background and do some stars in there as well, just using the same technique. Or it might even be something more intricate like a floral pattern or a damask pattern there. You can see as I work, and as the alcohol dries as well, the dots get lighter. And what you can even do, once they've dried a little bit, come back in again over the top and it will push more ink aside as well, making the pattern brighter. So you can keep layering it up, although it is important to wait for it to dry just a little bit in between to allow for the effect to be brighter. It works better on ink that's a little bit dry rather than freshly laid down, and that's why I went and coloured all of the foxes first rather than doing one at a time. So you can see that effect's really coming through now. On the fox at the bottom here, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do a crisscross pattern. So I'm just starting here drawing a line, and you can see I'm doing it over and over and over, layering up the colour. And we'll allow it to dry and see how bright that comes out. We can always come back and do more. So you can imagine you can start to do things like tartan effects or simple stripes through an outfit or something like that as well. You can see they come out really nice and bright. You can even come back in the other direction. We'll do like a diagonal crisscross type pattern. But you can see the key here is that our image still has depth on it. We've done all of our shading first, keeping in mind light source, highlight, midtone and shadow, just like all the theory we've gone through previously. So that when we come back and add our pattern on top, even though our pattern is quite flat, like we're just literally doing a resist technique, the rest of the fox still has that beautiful texture on it and that light and shade, that depth to make this still look three-dimensional. See how quick and easy that was to create that crisscross effect there. Now this last technique, I'm going to be using my Colorless blender refill, or you can use rubbing alcohol. Now this here is Icicle. Sorry, mine's not in the best condition. It's well loved and well used. Icicle is 100% isopropyl alcohol. In Australia, you can buy this just at the supermarket. And that's what I use to even clean my markers with. You can use your Colorless blender solution as well for this technique. They're alcohol markers, so obviously using a rubbing alcohol is going to react with the marker. I've got here a towel, so just an old towel. I've used a dark color one, or use one that you're not currently using so you can't see the ink. You can even cut up an old towel. Things like denim, things, just textured materials work really well here. I sort of fluff up the fibers a little bit first as well. Pour a little bit of your rubbing alcohol or your Colorless blender refill on top. Now, I've probably poured too much. It's really wet right now. So I'm just going to let this sit for a little minute, but I'm going to just puff up the texture. You want it damp but not soaking wet. And what I'm going to do now is grab it so I've got control over what I'm laying down and dab this over parts of the fox. Now you can count, I'm going to count to 5 here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and lift. Do the rest of the area as well. Just make sure that you've got a good pressure on it and that the pressure is even over the whole part that you're laying down on the image. If you've missed anywhere, just concentrate in that area. And you can see that's giving us a really nice furry texture on the fox. You can see there's a bit of color here on the background, but that's just because it's wet, because I've only just laid that down. That'll dry out nice and smooth. But you can see we've got this really nice fuzzy furry texture happening on top, and that was so easy to do. Like I mentioned before, things like denim, things that have a strong pattern, you can use and create this resist effect with the rubbing alcohol or your Colorless blender refill. And you've got all of the depth already in there from the shading we did right at the start. So that's a really fun technique. You can experiment a lot with that. There's many different things that you can achieve. One more technique that I want to run through here, I'm going to come down to this last fox, and I want to do a watercolor type effect. And I'm going to show you how we can paint with our Colorless blender. Now you need to use something like an acetate block, like one of your stamping blocks, or a sheet of, I've got here just some, it's a plastic bag that I'm even using. And you want to grab a marker to use. Now this technique works best with darker markers, because what you're doing is actually desaturating the color a lot. So this is going to end up a lot lighter. To show you that, I'm just going to come in here, I'll color one of these squares. This is my BB17. You can use any shadow color for this step. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get my plastic and I'm coloring all over here, making myself a big palette to work from. And then I'm going to use my Colorless blender, so my clear pen, and pick up a little bit of the ink, and you can see it on the nib there. Lay this down on the image in the shadow areas first because that'll be the darkest. And you want to do one bit at a time, and then you can start to blend out that little area where you've laid down the ink. And then what we should get is a really nice transition from the color in the shadow areas out to the white in the highlight. So we're laying this just like we would do distress ink markers. I'm laying the color down in my shadow areas, but instead of using water to blend, I'm using my colorless blender. Just creating that really soft effect through my shadow areas here. And you can layer this up. If you want it darker, you can add more. You can basically keep working this until you're happy. You can also use more than one color as well. So you can really experiment and make this technique unique. Even for very soft backgrounds, this adds a really nice touch as well. And this won't ruin your colorless blender as well. You can absolutely use this marker to pick up other colors of ink. As you can see, as we're working and blending out toward the white, with more strokes we just lose the color pigment. So it does eventually just soften back down to that clear color. You can see there we've got that really pretty soft watercolor effect. And you can even just scribble out your blender pen, make sure that you've got no ink left on it before capping it up and reusing it. So we've used here a whole bunch of different techniques to create some really fun textures. So that's a really good way to start experimenting. This is just giving you a starting point to start learning a little bit more about what you can achieve in techniques and effects. We go through this in a lot more detail, especially textures with the blending fluid, in our clothing class and also in our animal technique class to create different ways of creating fur and textures. So if you'd like to learn more about these sort of techniques, check out those classes for a little bit more of an in-depth view. Thanks so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing your experiments here. I'll see you in the next video.